Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar series Beyond Limits, a deeper look at thinking. My name is Kate here and I'm going to be helping you think, first of all, what is the role of my thinking when I feel and perform at my best? So this mini series is based on our full program, which is called Beyond Limits, which is the critical understanding for peak performance and well-being. So our mission at Business Reimagined, for those of you not familiar with us, is to help people and businesses to realise their infinite potential and consistently feel and perform at their best. So notice that says realise their infinite potential. It's already there. You have it. We're just going to help you uncover it. And it gets covered up a lot of the times by our thinking. And it's our thinking that takes us out of our peak performance. And that's why we really help people to understand that better. So let's have a look at this mini series. So we've created 4 times 20-minute modules, which you can take and you can review. They're going to be on our YouTube channel. The first one, what's the role of my thinking when I feel and perform at my best? So we're going to have a look at the research in peak performance, because it's really important that you understand the difference between what is your thinking like when you're at your best versus what is it like when you're not at your best. Second part is going to be what is the invisible driver of my thinking? And then we're going to look at what do I need to know about stressful thinking. We have a special guest who's going to be with me for this, so Dr. Giles Croft. He's going to be teaching you about stress and the real nature of stress, not where we think it comes from, but where it actually comes from. And the very last part, part 4, is how do my thinking and feelings interact? So we often get this mixed up, and when we do, it can cause us all sorts of issues. So that's what we're going to look at. And you can see a giant key there, and really the key is understanding. So a lot of well-being workshops and performance workshops are trying to give you tools and techniques. That's not what we do at Business Reimagined. We are helping you to have a fresh understanding about peak performance and well-being. And when you see things differently, you will do things differently. That's the key to understanding. But because thinking is invisible, it can be really hard for us to see that. So what will you get out of it? Well, I think that the best thing I can do is show you what one of our Beyond Limits participants said. So she said, to begin with, I was admittedly a little skeptical, but as I listened closer and explored the content more, I began to understand the true meaning and implication of the power of our thinking. It offers a unique perspective and one which could be very powerful on so many levels, not just in our jobs, but more broadly in life ourselves. So as I said, this program and this mini-series is all about fresh thinking, seeing things differently. But to do that, we actually have to see our thinking. So as we get started on the content, I just want to have a think about our mental health. So I heard actually today a really nice, simple explanation about what mental health is. And they said that mental health is contentment. And so when we think about that, and that was Sydney Banks who had said that, we can see that our ultimate well-being, it's really us feeling good. When we feel good, we perform better. But what we find is that a lot of people are stuck in this ground zero, and that's sometimes known as languishing. Dr. Adam Grant, he wrote an article in the New York Times last year about that, so really interesting to read about that. People, they didn't really feel always at the bottom end, you know, they didn't feel really badly suffering, but they also didn't feel at their best. And of course, we have the traditional focus on mental illness, which is exploring anxiety and depression more, instead of what we take is the innate health approach, which is understanding what we're like when we're feeling good and expanding that more. So we really see a much more inclusive view of mental health. So as we start to think about a couple of things that we're going to look at today, one is peak performance and what it is, and the second one is thought. So these are just 2 concepts which we're going to carry on throughout the series. Those of you who have joined some of our webinars before, you'll have heard us talk about flow. So flow is our optimal state of consciousness when we feel our best and perform our best. So this was research done by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi in the 1970s But what I thought would be interesting today is to tell you a little bit about Csikszentmihalyi's background and why he got interested in flow in the first place. So his father was an ambassador to Italy. He was Hungarian himself, and the family moved to Italy. And during World War II, they got taken to a prisoner of war camp. And in terms of what had helped Csikszentmihalyi to survive that, he really felt that chess, which he got into in a big way there, was one of the things. When he played chess, he felt he got lost in it. He found it enjoyable. And he was able to zone out of the other things and just be really present and in the moment. So he saw the importance of this state and how this state could be determined by ourselves and not necessarily by our circumstances. So he went on to see, when do other people feel like this? And he started off looking at real peak performers, and then he just started to look at everyone, and looked at all kinds of people like jazz musicians and bakers and people in all sorts of industries. And what he found was that there was a real set of universal characteristics about when people felt when they were at their best. He felt that time flowed into one another, and that's why it became known as flow. So as we got started, I asked you to reflect on times in the past week when you felt at your best. So what was your thinking and feeling like? And I want you to see if any of these characteristics resonate on the next slide. So firstly, the self disappears. So we know from modern neuroscience why this happens now. We know that actually the executive function of our brain shuts down. So that critical thinking that we have, that disappears when we're in flow. We get time dilation. So this could look like time speeding up. So when we look at our watch and we say, wow, I can't believe it's been 2 hours, or it can be slowing down into a kind of a freeze frame effect. We get intense concentration. So we're really, really focused on what we're doing, but in a good way, in a way that feels pleasurable. It feels effortless. So we have this sense of effortlessness when we're in flow. So even though we might be doing something that's quite complex and is usually a stretch, we enjoy it because it feels effortless. There's a richness to the experience. It has a real quality about it. And lastly, it's intrinsically rewarding. So as we're doing it, we're enjoying the experience, it feels good in its own right. So a key takeaway from this slide is, if it feels hard what you're doing, then that isn't you at your best. So how do you get more of your best? That's what people ask us. Well, the trick is we need to get our biology to work for us rather than against us. We need to learn to get out of our own way. So here's what a whole range of peak performance literature show are some of the main things that people say they experience when they are at their peak performance. They have greater purpose. They're more connected to other people. They have greater clarity. They know what they need to do. The noise goes away. They're more engaged, creative, motivated. They have greater accountability and resilience, and most importantly as well, greater well-being. So I'm sure all of you will be thinking, how do I get more of that? You notice that in these words, we're not seeing that people are defensive or stressed or fearful. Peak performance is our natural state. So even if it's not something you're experiencing all the time, I'm sure there are those little moments where you feel this, where you feel relaxed, where you feel that contentment. So you're in good mental health, and we just want to help you see where you experience it and how you can get it more. So as we say, we help people to see that our peak performance is always there, but we get taken out of it by our thinking. And this is the second part of the understanding that I want to take you through today. So let's have a think about our thinking and where thinking comes from. First of all, maybe you have children or you've seen children, and you'll know that babies, they have really great resilience. So if you think about how long it takes a baby to learn to walk, it can be months and months of pulling themselves up by their little legs, trying to crawl on a sofa and falling over and doing it again. And we think, wow, God, they keep going and they keep trying. Why is it? Where do they get that resilience? The resilience is inbuilt. The difference is a baby hasn't got the thinking and learned cognitively, this is hard, or this is frightening, or I give up, or anything else that unfortunately we learn as soon as we get more cognitive processes. And that's just a sign that we have this real natural resilience within us. So then it's important to think about, so what is thought? If thought is taking us out of our well-being, what is it, and what do I need to do about it? So thought isn't good or bad. Thought is just one of the mechanisms that we have in our mind that helps us do different things. And it can be a real creative agent, and that can be useful when we're doing a creative task and we're trying to think differently and innovate. And that's one of the reasons why, humans have been so successful as a species, because we've been able to innovate and think differently and think about ideas. But the other part of thought is that we can create worlds that don't exist, and we believe those worlds, whether they're real or not. It was the physicist David Bohm who said, and thought creates our reality, and then says, I didn't do it. So we really have to understand thought and what it looks like in more detail. So if you're ever wondering what thought actually looks like, this is it on the screen right now. So this is thought. It's just neurons connecting. There's no story to this. There's no, he said this and she said that, and if only that hadn't happened, this is what thought is, pure and simple if we look at it at a molecular level. So let's start to get a bit deeper about what thought is. So thought is formless energy. The fact that we think is constant, but what we think changes. We have infinite potential for new thought. Thought is our reality, and thought has no life of its own. It can only last as long as we think it. So that's why it's nice to think about thought as a cloud, because it is always changing, it's always moving, it's morphing. It's hard for us to actually keep a thought in our head, because thought is constantly changing. It's energy. But whatever we think at a particular time becomes our reality. And we see this in different research, for example, when they looked at basketball players and they compared basketball players who were shooting hoops physically, who were visualizing shooting hoops, and those who were a control group who weren't practicing. So the control group didn't get better, but both the visualization group and the group that physically practiced got better. So this just shows how much our thought is really creating our reality and our performance. But let's have a little play with it now. I just want you to take 20 seconds, and I'm just going to ask you not to think at all. So I'm just going to get my watch and time this for a second. So we're going to start. So just try not to think anything at all for 20 seconds. Okay, starting now. Okay, that's it. How did you get on? Okay, a couple of things coming through the chat now. So yeah, it was difficult, hard. Yeah, of course, because thought is a mechanism. We don't have to do anything to think. Thinking is universal. So thinking is a mechanism. We can't control it. We don't need to control it. We just have to understand it. But we don't have to put effort into thought. It comes naturally to us. What happens is when we start to mistake the facts that we think for the content of our thinking. So tell me if any of these resonate for you. So these are different kinds of thoughts. So these thoughts, they feel more real than other thoughts, but they're still just as, I say, made up or learned. But we don't grow up with these rules. The babies don't know these things. They learn over time about a different rule we have, that don't speak unless you're spoken to, it could be, or maybe they learn a fear that, mummy and daddy don't like that. And we start to learn these things, and we grow up and we get older, and there are some thoughts that we just never think to question, and we don't know where they come from, and we don't realize that they're this formless energy. So we believe these thoughts, whatever they are, and the more we believe them, we give them attention. When we give them attention, we make them bigger and bigger and bigger. And the thoughts become even more personal and real when we're making them personal. So we've got a couple down here in bold, or we've got 5. So, we can have different beliefs. So they feel strongly, they feel like they're really real to us, don't they? This is what I believe. So we can hold on to that quite tightly. We have narratives. So we create the narrative. It can be a personal narrative. So when I do this, this happens. Or it can be that whenever my manager comes into the room, she always seems to have more time for people than she has for me. Can be another one. We have identity. As soon as we get involved, as soon as it's about me, then our thoughts can become much bigger and more real. And we can have control. And this can look like I only feel comfortable when I know exactly what's going to happen, which, by the way, we never know. And the last thing is conditioning. So this is about where we learn things. So we learn things socially, through our education, our family, our culture, and there are just certain things that we don't question as the way they are. So these are all different types of thought, but as soon as we have a thought that becomes too fixed, it becomes a limit. So I've been talking about a few personal things, but as soon as we start to make them about work, for example, we can see them as well. So it could be, I can't talk to that person because they are more senior than me, or I can't make that decision because the last time someone made it, there was an issue. So we start to see that we create all of these old limits that bound, restrain, or confine us. So if I think about it, for me recently, I just had a situation where I hired someone to do some work for me, and I really wasn't happy with the quality. I felt let down. I started to have those identity things and the narratives coming in. It made me angry. I thought, how could they do that? They knew the brief. This is really unfair. And of course, as soon as I had that stressful thinking, I had the stressful feeling as well. So I was then limited. I could only see that one way of thinking about it. And we see this from people at work as well. When you do our Beyond Limits program, here's a couple of quotes about what the limits of thinking might look like at work. So we're so scared to make decisions that we've lost our creative edge, are playing it safe, and have become hesitant and slow. Yeah, how many people are doing that? Where we actually we become so inhibited. Remember, we talked about the self disappearing. Well, here's the self really, really at large here. Or another one, I feel like a dog trying to chase my own tail all the time. I'm exhausted and I feel like we're getting nowhere. So you can hear the identity and the narrative in that. It's starting to feel heavy. And when we've got heavy thinking, we've got heavy feeling. And that's difficult. And that's just adding so much more weight and pressure. So we believe it's time to move beyond limits. But in order to do that, we've got to be able to see them first. So as soon as we see something as thought created and changeable, our potential increases. So again, if I come back to the person that was just getting some work done for me, I had a sleepless night, kind of gnashing my teeth and thinking this is so unfair, and this isn't what I asked for, and this hasn't been good enough. And I went to bed and I woke up the next morning eventually, and of course, I've slept, so the pressure's come off a bit, and the solution just came to me. And suddenly I knew what I needed to do. It's still not resolved, but at least I knew the next step to take, and I knew I could drop the thinking, because I knew the thinking, my own thoughts, they were the things making me feel stressed, not what had happened actually in and of itself. We can always let go of the stress if we want to. And so that's why that's going to be part of our module 3. But everyone that works in this field of innate health, we know it's an infinite ladder of awareness, because as I said earlier, that it's very well known in physics that we don't see the impact that our thinking has on our performance and on our well-being. So what happened to me? How did I have that insight, that realization? Well, this quote sums it up nicely. So the amount of synapses that fire when we have an aha creative moment are a few hundred. The amount that fire when we're having a stress out about whether it's right or wrong are several thousand. we may never hear the aha moment underneath the noise. So that is just pointing to the fact that when we've got a quieter mind, when we're able to slow down and not buy into the noise of our thinking, things go better for us. It's better for our well-being and it's better for our performance. So remember, I want you to focus in on what it feels like when you're at your best. So over the next week, as you start to look at this, start to notice how much of self disappears when you're at your best and how effortless it feels, and how good it feels. I want you to really keep an eye out for that. So if I'm going to summarize all of this just in the last slide, skills and techniques are crucial, but mental clarity is always the deciding factor in our performance. We know this in the sporting world. We can have the person who is the best in their game, but suddenly they have an off game and they don't win. And why is it? They surely have everything that they need to do it. But if the mental clarity isn't there, then we know our performance always dips. So hopefully you've started to see your thoughts or the lack of your thinking when you're at your best. And that's what I want you to continue doing over the next week, because remember, it's the awareness that's key. When you start to see your thoughts, that's the first step in thinking about what do I do next about it. If you have liked the content, feel free to follow our LinkedIn page where we'll share some different research every now and again, or feel free to share with your teams internally. They can get recordings of this and the rest of the series as well and join in. And of course, if you think I could really do with that bit of extra support, then feel free to contact us for one-to-one coaching and workshops as well. But we've come to the end. Thank you so much for joining. I know we've got people from all around the world today, and I really appreciate you coming to join us. Spread the word, the more the merrier at the next one. And please feel free to look at the follow-up resources that we'll send and to get in touch and let us know what you think. Thanks so much and take care.